And China's a great big puzzle. It gets you very interested. Once you start getting involved, you don't want to give up. Well, we had the person I dealt with the most in that period was Ji Chaozhu, who later became Undersecretary General of the UN and served as ambassador several times for China. And his job, when we first opened the embassy after being a liaison office, the government under President Carter and then President Reagan, but first under Carter, determined that we should have maximum number of delegations visit China. So every day we at the embassy had, every day, 300 times a year, we had a new visiting delegation from some state or some agency. And every night we had to entertain them. And Mr. Ji Chaozhu, who's a wonderful man, educated at Harvard University, spoke brilliant English, maybe better than his Chinese. He had the duty of taking them out to dinner somewhere. I thought maybe after 50 dinners of Peking duck, that was enough. But he had it every night, hosting all these people. And he kept on, he and the other, Han Xu, who was a junior to him, later became ambassador to Washington, were people we knew fairly well. They were very competent people, but there were very few. China had so few working diplomats who knew the outside world, and they had a heavy burden on their shoulders. I've been lucky enough to accompany presidents and leaders to meetings with leaders all over the world. And I get kind of excited when I'm near famous opera singers. But most presidents are not that interesting. Most leaders are not that interesting. Deng Xiaoping was interesting. I first saw him in 1979 when he came to the U.S. as vice premier representing China to the White House to signify the opening of the U.S.-China relationship. And I remember walking around the White House gardens alongside Jimmy Carter, the President of the United States, and Deng Xiaoping, the Vice Premier of China. And they were talking to the audience that was awaiting the state ceremonies, a cold, snowy day in Washington. And the person who exuded the most warmth and the most eye contact and direct communication with the people there was not the American president. It was Deng Xiaoping. And then in many meetings thereafter here in China, you could see Deng Xiaoping, even as he got quite old, was always in command of his material, in no need of paper advice, no need of advice from staff. He just needed an interpreter and someone to shout in his ear because he had bad hearing. But he knew what he wanted from every meeting and he pushed for it quite effectively. I and the chairman of AIT at the time, who was Washington-based, had a little debate in front of the president about what was going on. And at the end of our conversation, the president said to me, Doug, I don't do nuance. You tell Chen Shui-bian, not only do I not support Taiwan independence, I absolutely oppose Taiwan independence. And so I went back to Taipei and I asked for an appointment with Chen Shui-bian, and I told him, and on, and the anger that came out of him. And his response, it's kind of an interesting story, his response was, Taiwan 不是你们的州，不是他们的省. Taiwan isn't your state or their province. Taiwan will not be marginalized, it will not be made small. Taiwan stands as an independent country. And that was interesting at the time. That's his view. Later, after he left office and was being prosecuted in the defense of his actions as president doing some small corrupt business, he said that he was only taking orders from America because, after all, Taiwan was the 51st U.S. state. So this argument turned over time depending on what he wanted to do. We're going through a very important global change. The post-Cold War unipolar world of the U.S. being the most dominant country and others being much less a factor, has changed again. And now we have a Russia which is trying to exercise power, but from a weak base. We have Europe, which is becoming more inward-looking. We have the Middle East, which is in great disorder. And we have China rising as a power, maybe India following. And so there's a great disorder and disarray in the shape of global power structure. The old way of doing business can't continue the way it has. We have to find new ways of doing business. We have to make room for China. We have to find ways to discipline Russia so that it does less harm and more good. We've got to get Europe back in, taking a responsible role in the world, and somehow find a way to contain the troubles in the Middle East and maybe move them on a path toward better development. These are beyond the capacity of the United States by itself. Those days are over where we had dominance economically and with that dominance militarily. But we're not powerless. We still have a big role to play. And we were ineffective in trying to find a way to manage South China Sea, the Korean Peninsula, East China Sea, competition in Southeast Asia, let alone elsewhere. We need to go at these conceptually. We need to have a way of discussing with each other's leaders how China's power can grow, but not necessarily at the expense of America's interests. And how do we fit our friends and allies and neighbors into the formula? And I think we need some big thinking.